Hi, so this is Suzanne Duchesne, and I'm with the Reverend Hannah Adair Bonner. She just spoke at the United Methodist Women's Assembly, and she has been here all week. And Hannah, I would like you to share um, whatever it is that maybe you haven't had a chance to share this week, and share with us what you'd like for us to know about your work, your experiences, what's happening right now.
Yeah. I guess that the one thing that I didn't really get to talk about is the work of Methodist women together. And in the sense that, I think I was probably asked to speak here because of my work with Sandra Bland. And I think that something that I find really important for people to understand is that Sandra was a Methodist woman with a calling from God that she answered, and that's what made everything possible afterwards, in the ways that her life impacted the world. And sadly, her death impacted the world in a way that created change um, in our justice system for women. But that all of it was made possible because she answered a call from God. That she, in January of 2015, received a call to talk about justice and her faith, and that she made 32 videos in the 6 months before she died, and that those videos are the things that guided our actions, and that she created them in an answer to a call from God without knowing why she was doing it or why she was called to do it, but she obeyed anyway, and she did it. And she didn't know that she was going to lose her life. She didn't know, but because she obeyed, um, other Christians and other people of faith were able to rise up and to help her voice continue to be heard. And so I think she's an example for us of the importance of answering our call, even when we don't see the complete journey or understand the complete journey, and that she should be seen as a Methodist theologian and leader and activist, and part of our family. And so that I hope that others see the responsibility that I felt to her and to her voice and to helping her be heard.
So you're no longer keeping vigil there. You're now in Arizona.
Yes.
So how does that experience of keeping vigil and say the name, Sandra Bland, say her name, and all the women and young men too, but that,
Mm-hmm.
and especially women of color, African American women, how has that informed your work where you are in Arizona?
Yeah, the interesting thing is it felt so similar, and it actually hit me as soon as I arrived, that where I was in Texas, I was at a HBCU in a I will say, pretty racist county in Texas, and the African American students there felt targeted because of the color of their skin by law enforcement. And I arrived near the border to a campus where, students who were immigrant students or even indigenous students were feel targeted because of the color of their skin. And so it's a similar situation to me. The feeling of fear when one sees in Texas, the state troopers, or in near the border, the green stripes on the border patrol truck. The students, the flavor of the fear is the same. It smells the same. And so I think that I definitely quickly saw what my role in Arizona was, um, because I sensed the places that felt familiar and similar, to the work that I'd been doing. And so, I think that when one hasn't lived in a space occupied by Border Patrol, when one hasn't had their local space occupied by our national government, one doesn't know what it feels like. And even living in Texas and having lived so close to the border, I didn't know what it felt like until I was there, in what we call a constitution-free zone, where we're not really sure what they can do to us, but um, our rights are not the same as if we were somewhere else, because of the broad liberties given to Homeland Security. And so it's an interesting space that I'm still trying to listen and learn how to navigate. But leveraging privilege in acts of solidarity will look different there, because we can't count on having the same rights that people have in other parts of the country.
Mm-hmm. So you and I were talking before I started filming, and we were interviewing. We were talking about my recent trip to the UN, and I met with a number of indigenous groups that the border is irrelevant. I mean, it's relevant because it's being
Right.
militarized, but this is their land. It was given to them, and there is no Mexico-U.S. border. It is just their land, and it runs across, and it's very, very precarious. And it sounds like you've had interactions with this. You said you mentioned some indigenous people, maybe. So I'm
Yeah.
just
So the
curious.
University of Arizona is on the land of the Tohono O'odham, which is a nation that is here long before any of the rest of us. And as well, south of Tucson is the territory of the Pascua Yaqui, and so huge chunks of Arizona are also the territory of the Navajo and of other nations. And what I hear from students who are, for instance, Hannah Throssell is from the Tohono O'odham Nation, and she's on the 4th episode of our podcast, The Hap, which is the podcast that my students started on SoundCloud.
Okay.
And so she shared with us about how, as a woman of the Tohono O'odham and Navajo nations, she sees how people who are indigenous are profiled, because our government is so intent on imprisoning the bodies of brown folk in for-profit institutions, businesses like Core Civic, who runs Eloy, which is known as the suicide capital of the United States, which is the detention facility for immigrants closest to us, as well as Florence. And both of these are for-profit businesses that are contracted with the government and who profit the longer they can keep people in detention. So fathers and mothers kept in detention really for an indeterminate amount of times. Now that laws have been passed that they don't have to be given a bond hearing, that means they can be held indefinitely for profit, for businesses, which has, of course, an overlap with the mass incarceration conversation that the United Methodist Women are having. And so the way that then our indigenous students are also caught up into that, because the government, Border Patrol, is so intent on making sure that people who are seeking a life in this territory are that as many are captured as they can. That means that they racially profile people with brown skin, which means that impacts our indigenous students who have been here before any of the rest of us, and upon whose land the university has been unjustly built, right? So it's very painfully, ironic is too soft of a word to use. But she, if you listen to the podcast, she tells us about how, people will be, or she may have said it off recording, but that people will be like, well, if you don't like it here, go back where you came from. And it's like, well, I came from here. You're the ones who didn't. Like, and people will tell, they don't care that somebody's indigenous. They'll still, even if they do know, they'll be, oh, well, go to Mexico if you don't like how we do things here. And it's like, how twisted is that and backwards is that? Yeah.
So, as a member of the Northeast Jurisdiction and Committee on Native American Ministries, I guess I would ask you from that position now, churches, CONAMs, indigenous people in the Northeast, non-Indigenous people, non-Native people that would like to either partner with you or learn more or get involved in a different way? Do you have recommendations or suggestions?
Yeah, I would say the people they should have be partnering with is, of course, our local folks, and I'd be glad to serve as a bridge to connect them with folks on the border. There are lands of the Tohono O'odham that our border goes through. So part of their lands are in Mexico and part are in the United States, as you well know. And so I think that it it is intellectually negligent to have a conversation about the border without including them, and that is what our nation is doing. Our nation is leaving them out of the conversation when they ought to be having a place of honor within it.
Amen. Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah,
Thank you
my
for
pleasure.
taking time to talk to me today.